The Rider on the White Horse. The Rider on the White Horse, German, Der Schimmelreiter, is a novella by German writer Theodor Storm. It is his last complete work, first published in 1888, the year of his death. The novella is Storm's best remembered and most widely read work, and considered by many to be his masterpiece. It has been translated into English under titles The Dykemaster, The Dikegrave, and the most literal, The Rider on the White Horse, Schimmel being the German word for a gray or white horse. Plot summary. The novella tells the story of Hagen, related to the narrator by a schoolmaster in a small town in northern Frisia. Hawk is the son of a farmer and licensed surveyor and does his best to learn his father's trade. He even learns Dutch so he can read a Dutch print of Euclid's work on mathematics and geometry. Over time he becomes very familiar with the dikes along the local coast and begins to wonder if it would not be better to make them flatter on the seaside so as to reduce their windage during floods. When local Dikegrave Tied Volkerts fires one of his hands, Hawk applies for the job and is accepted. He soon becomes a great help for Volkerts, which makes old Peters, the senior hand, dislike him. Tensions rise even more when Hawk begins to show interest in the Dikegrave's daughter, Elk. Hawk even proposes marriage, but she wants to wait. After the unexpected deaths of both Hawk's and Elk's fathers, the people of the village must choose a new Dikegrave. Hawk is actually already doing the work, but does not hold the necessary lands required for the position. However, Elk announces that they are engaged, and that he will soon hold her family's lands as well. With the traditionalists satisfied, Hawk becomes the new Dikegrave. However, the people soon start talking about his white horse, which they believe is a resurrected skeleton that used to be visible on a small island, but is now gone. Meanwhile, Hawk begins to implement the changes to the form of the dikes that he has envisaged since childhood. However, during a storm surge several years later, the older dikes break and Hawk has to witness Elk and their daughter, Wink, being swept away by the water. In agony, he drives his white horse into the sea, yelling, "Lord, take me, spare the others." The novella ends with the schoolmaster recounting that after the flood the mysterious horse skeleton was once again seen lying on the small island off the coast. Hagen's dike still stands and has saved many lives in the 100 years since its creator's tragic demise. And the older ones in the village say that, on stormy nights, a ghostly rider on a white horse can sometimes be seen patrolling the dike. Characters. Hagen, the main character, based on mathematician and astronomer Hans Mommsen. Elkhagen nie Volkerts, the old Dykemaster's daughter and Hawk's wife. Winkhagen, Hawk and Elk's mentally challenged daughter. Tied Volkerts, Elk's father and Dykemaster prior to Hawk. Old Peters, the old Dykemaster's senior hand and Hawk's rival. The schoolmaster, a man from the town who tells the story to the narrator 100 years later, 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 years later. Reception. Thomas Mann called it a tremendous tale, with which Storm took his conception of the novella as epic sister of drama to unprecedented heights. Michael Dirda says that it is arguably the greatest 19th-century German novella. Adaptations. Der Schimmelreiter has been adapted into a movie 3 times, in 1934, in 1978, and again for television in 1984. There is also a stage version as an opera by Wilfried Hiller, first performed in Kiel in 1998.